Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony Needs Hobbies. My name is Tony and in this video I am going to make a pouch for both the Leatherman Wave multi-tool as well as for the bit kit that you can get for it. Have fun watching. I have made some pouches before for my Victorinox Swiss Army knife and I got some comments on that video that it should have included a belt loop. So for this project I will definitely not forget about the belt loop. But before we start working on that, we have to mold the leather first, so let's get on with that.
Let's take a look at the tool and the bit kit and take some measurements. The Leatherman Wave is 18mm thick and the two parts of the bit kit are in total 15mm thick. That is very convenient since those thicknesses are also standard thicknesses for plywood and I luckily have some sheets lying around in the shed. I am going to wet mold leather to form the front pieces of the sheaths. The mold consists out of one insert piece that has the same size as the multi-tool or bit kit, one piece that is just a square with the other piece cut out, and that piece to clamp it all to. After transferring all the measurements onto the wood, I cut the pieces out using my jigsaw. Then I round off all the corners and edges with this little disc sander. It's actually a bit too small for pieces this size, but can do the job if you are really careful. With some hand sanding, all the roughness has to be removed, because anything that remains will transfer into the leather when molding, which is the next step that I will do. For the slightly smaller pouch for the bit kit, I use the same cutout but a slightly smaller insert. I am going to use 3.5mm thick or 9-ounce fetch tan leather. In order for it to wet mold, it needs to be wet, of course. I'll put it in water and let it soften until all bubbling is gone. Then I take it out of the water, put the leather on the workbench and let the water that is still on the surface absorb. Before squeezing the leather in between the parts of the mold, I will first try to give it some initial shape with my hands. The leather is then covered in saran wrap, as is the mold, so that there is no chemical interaction between the wood and the wet leather, which might result in staining. I loosely secure it a bit so that I'm still able to stretch the leather out so that it sits flat to the mold. Then I clamp it all together tightly using some quick release clamps.
Now you have to wait a couple hours until the leather takes on the shape of the mold, and it gives me the perfect opportunity to introduce to you these t-shirts that I've been wearing lately. They are designed by Martin of Idyllio Design. You might have seen him appearing in some videos on this channel. The t-shirts are available through my merchandise store and I have many designs including some tools that I use regularly on this channel, like the wing dividers that are on this t-shirt. I will use the wing dividers later on in this video. Please have a look in the merchandise store and don't feel obliged to buy anything, but if you do, it will greatly help out this channel. So now I will continue with this video tomorrow morning and through the magic of video editing that will be right now.
The next day I take the leather out of the mold and let it dry completely. While the molded parts are drying out, I can start working on the other parts.
The front pieces for both the multi-tool itself as well as the bit kit came out of the mold perfectly fine. So now I can continue with creating the back part, including the flap, and not to forget the belt loop.
I have to dye the leather first, and while I was preparing for that, I emptied almost the entire bottle over myself, from which I learned to always wear gloves when working with dye. Fortunately, there is still just enough dye left to dye all the pieces, since I often dilute it a bit. My dyeing work isn't perfect, but it will nicely dry up into an even mahogany color. It would have been more even if I would have used circular motions when applying it, another thing I learned. Using this strap cutter, I cut a 25mm strap to make the belt loops from, which I then cut into two 80mm pieces. Then I'll cut off the corners for better looks. I also cut off the excess from the front pieces to leave a wide enough border for stitching later on. Then the most difficult part, the back and flaps. I cut it out to be as wide as the two molded pieces and long enough so that the flap can close the pouches. Then with all kinds of tools and cutters I create the shape of this part. It's all quite rough, but during the finishing process it will start to look real good, I promise, but I cannot start with that before installing the snap buttons. Since the molded parts have some sort of weird shape, I use a hammer as an anvil to be able to cut the holes and install the buttons. For the flap that is not needed, it's done on the bench surface. I really want this to be my best work yet, and in order to achieve that, I have to finish the edges now that I cannot reach when the pieces are put together. I'll start with the belt loops, but first I have to make stitching holes in them before I will edge finish them. For finishes I like a natural finish look that I get by using an edge beveler, dye, gum drag, beeswax and a slicker. I first bevel the front and back edges, then dye them, apply the gum track and shine it up using some cloth. In between each of the steps I wait for around 5 minutes for the liquids to soak in. Finally I rub beeswax on and slick it with this wooden slicker. I'm very pleased with the look that this process provides, so I did it for the unreachable parts of the front pieces as well, and I will finish all the other edges later on in exactly the same way.
Now I have finished the edges of all the pieces and locations that I can no longer reach once this thing has been constructed, so the next step is putting it all together. For that I will make use of my homemade stitching pony, and I will use a saddler stitch to stitch it all together.
I start with the belt loops. For better adhesion I use a scratching awl to roughen up the surface where the glue goes. Then some contact cement is applied and distributed into an even coat. After waiting until the glue is dry to the touch, I align the holes with some needles so I can easily stitch the parts up. Once both loops are glued to the back, I can commence with stitching. The beginning and end of each row of stitches is double stitched for extra durability. I will explain how I'm stitching later on, but there are many instructions available on YouTube, including one of my own videos. When a row is completed, I double stitch 2 stitches, cut the thread on the suede side of the leather, melt it using a lighter, and hammer down the stitches to improve the looks. Following this, I have to punch holes for stitching the molded parts to the back. First I will mark where the holes have to go using this beautiful high quality pair of wing dividers that I found at a garage sale. For decoration purposes I continue this line along the edge of the flaps. Then I punch exactly the same amount of holes at exactly the same position on both the back part and the molded pieces so that the holes line up nicely. Starting with one of the molded parts, I glue it to the back and stitch it up as clean as I can. For this I use a saddler's stitch. This means I use one long thread and 2 needles. Both needles go back and forth through the leather, resulting in a full row of stitches on both sides. It's probably the most durable way to stitch leather, because every stitch you make is locked tightly. Also, if you give it some practice, it looks really good. Mine look good now after some practice. I still see some inconsistencies in my work, but in general I'm very pleased with the result, so I can move on to the finishing steps.
Now it is all glued and stitched up. I'm going to hammer down the stitches then smoothen the edges by sanding them down, and then do the edge finishing in exactly the same way as how I finished the edges of the belt loops, and then this project is finished.
When everything was smooth from sanding with 180 grit sandpaper, I made a mistake by going straight into dyeing. I forgot that I needed to bevel the edge first, so I'll fast forward to that. After this dye application, I had to wait until it was completely dry again. Then I beveled all the edges inside and out and dyed the exposed undyed leather again. Here you see my inexperience, and it costs me a lot of time. I'm just figuring out what I need to do as I go, and sometimes that means mistakes will be made. If you face this too, don't worry, as many of the mistakes can be fixed, as you can see later on in my final result. Let's continue with the next step, applying gum drag on the edge. I use a liberal amount and let it soak in before I use a rag to shine it up. It's super easy and already gives a nice look, but to improve durability I will seal it by applying beeswax and slicking the edge with a wooden slicker. This is thick leather, so in order for it to bend properly and precondition the flap to be bendable in the future, I wet it just a tad, let the water soak in and then bend the flaps over. Then I wait for it to completely dry again so that I can continue with the last step. And that final step that I take for most of my projects is first applying some beeswax based conditioner, after which I apply neat's foot oil. This will feed the leather and will also make it a bit darker and evens out some of the irregularities from dyeing. That was the final step, so here is the result.
In my opinion, this sheath for a Leatherman Wave plus its bit kit is the best looking leathercraft project I have made in my leathercraft journey, and I hope you agree. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section, that would greatly help out this channel. You can also support the channel by hitting the like button, and you can support it even more by taking a look in the merchandise store, which I will link in the top right corner as well as in the description. In this merchandise store you can buy t-shirts like the one that I'm currently wearing, with tools on it that I use in the workshop regularly. You can get them with the word mark or without, whatever you like, and as I said, it would greatly help out this channel. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, then let me know by hitting that like button. Please consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. And that's it for now. I would like to thank you for watching. Bye bye.